I'll do the shtick.
Oh my goodness.
I wonder where that word came from.
Shtick?
Like you've heard of that, right? Like
Yeah.
what's the shtick? Like what's the
Do we need to look up the
like,
origin
what's
of
the
that?
deal kind of
Yeah,
thing? I'll
yeah.
give you the lowdown, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Let
Can you look up the origin,
me-
please?
right now I can
Yeah.
do that. Ah. It's Yiddish.
Oh.
Originally referred to a routine or gimmick used by a performer, often in
Oh, yeah.
stand-up
Okay.
comedy.
A shtick.
A shtick.
So you've given him the shtick.
I gave him the shtick.
I got the shtick.
This is so great. I know we say it every time, but this time I'm really super excited because I really didn't think that this was going to happen like anytime soon, that we were going to get.
I know. I thought that you were going to be season 2.
Well,
So this is really exciting for us.
I'm very happy to be here. I mean,
So I don't.
We
I
haven't
think
we haven't introduced
No, but I was going to say, I'm not sure I know how to say his last name. I think I do. Let me try.
okay.
It's Anthony Freveletti.
Absolutely
yet.
perfect.
Oh my gosh, you're so good. I was going to botch that whole thing.
I
But
had a
also-
feeling I was going to get it.
But I also say shtick.
You'd have been fine.
I also call him the wine guy.
That's
I
easy.
I do call refer to
If
him as-
people, if I say I'm
yeah.
like Anthony, you
The
know,
wi- the wine
Anthony, the
guy.
wine guy.
That's
Yeah.
the easiest,
Yeah.
probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's okay. That's a great title to have. I mean, you know
There could be worse things
Yeah,
people say
that's
about
for
you.
sure.
Yeah. Maybe there might be
I'm
worse
sure
things
there
that
is.
some people do say,
Yeah,
right?
very
Absolutely.
possible.
Everybody's got that.
I haven't
Yes.
heard it.
I haven't
but-
either.
But
All I know is that everybody loves you.
yes.
And
I mean, and why wouldn't they? He brings the wine.
Yeah.
he brings the wine. So even if you don't like him, you have enough of those and you're good to
Right,
go. You love
right.
the guy.
Yes.
Because all you're going to want to do is talk wine, which is how I really got to know you, was at a party.
Same.
Steve Wagner, I believe it was.
Yes.
And, it's a couple of years
It was
ago.
a while back.
And we found you in the kitchen, and I was probably going back for more wine. We got on the subject of, like, because I told you about how I get headaches with certain wines,
Right.
and you really did such a great job explaining that to me. And it was so nice to hear because it's like you never, like, I love wine. But I thought, oh, well, it's this variety. I just can't have this kind of wine. But it's not the wine. It's not the grape.
Right.
It's the crap they put in it.
Yes, that's the biggest thing. I think because all the wine labels say contains sulfites.
Yeah.
Which he talked about this at the
Yeah.
wine tasting,
We
where
have to put that on the label by law.
right.
Right? And so immediately when people are getting headaches, sometimes you don't realize it, but after a long night of dinners and drinking and so on, you're actually, your stomach, you're having digestive issues. And it's sometimes you don't really feel it, but your muscles are tensing because your digestive tract is in a bit of let's say, trauma.
Sure,
Right?
yeah.
And which causes other muscles, because everything's connected, to tighten up. And before you go to bed, you're like, oh, I shouldn't have had that, last couple of glasses of wine. And then, of course, the next morning you wake up with a hangover. And so about, I don't know, some 2 decades, past, people were turning to wine and drinking more and more wine because, as we read and we've been told, it's healthy for us. And so people started to drink wine, and then once your palate gets adjusted to it, you really start to like it, and then you find the one that really kind of... And then about 15 years goes by, and everybody's like, I don't drink as much wine as I used to because I get a headache, or I don't feel so well at the end of the night, and of course, hangovers.
Wine hangovers are the worst.
They are, and
If it's shitty wine.
Exactly, and so okay, so we can drink this bottle of wine that we have here in front of us.
Yeah, so
and
how
we're
long
not
do we
gonna-
have to let it sit there?
It's ready to go. That's
Awesome.
That's a wine that you can jump into.
Okay,
Right,
I'm
so-
pouring it.
Absolutely.
I support
Do you want to
this.
taste it? Make sure.
Of course.
As Swider would say, there's no bad grapes.
Yeah.
There's no bad grapes.
That's the thing that we don't know or realize when they say contains sulfites. Sulfite's a natural element in plant life and so on, and it's a natural preservative and so on. And so when we press the grapes, that releases, the sulfite into the wine. But then after fermentation process takes place, that sulfite's pretty much dissipated. So then we can use about 2 parts, I forget the equation, it's 2 parts to every 10,000 or 100,000, whatever, parts of wine. And that is still considered a natural wine. And it's not affecting the wine, it just stabilizes it, because we have to ship it all over the world, and you don't want wild fermentation to spontaneously happen again, etc. The difference is today, or for the past, decade and a half, 2 decades, we've been sterilizing the wine with sulfur dioxide, right? So now you're sterilizing the wine, so it's no longer healthy. It's not cleaning your, going through your bloodstream and cleaning out your blood. But when we sterilize it, we can then start to put the additives in to create a flavor profile that's consistent with the wine you've been buying for last year and the year before and the year before. And that's what keeps you coming back to the store. And because you found one that you kind of like, and you like the flavor, and you're comfortable with the price. So if you notice that a lot of the store-bought wines, you already know what to expect before you buy the wine. That's why you went in there and bought it.
Yeah.
And it's going to taste the same every year in, year out. And
Yeah.
I call that kind of like the Coca-Cola effect. Yeah. And so, unfortunately, they add so many different things, coloring agents. You can use artificial yeasts to create, aroma and flavor profiles, right? I can make the wine taste any way I want if I just buy that particular yeast. Gum arabic, which makes the wine thick and gives you the legs, right? Everybody thinks that, the legs on your glass, those streams running down, are a mark of quality, right? And it's got nothing really
That's what
to
we've
do
been
with
told.
quality.
Yeah,
That's what we've been
exactly.
told for decades. And so they know that you think that and know that. So they add this gum arabic, does a little bit of stabilizing, but more or less it's to give you viscosity, gives it thickness, it gives you legs. And so there's so many different things going on. You notice that when you guys buy food, that on the back of your food product, it lists all of the ingredients and all the things that are inside that food product, right?
Yes.
Well, wine's a food product as well.
Right.
And if you notice, there's not one thing on that label that tells you what's been added to that wine.
Right.
It only says contains sulfite, so
Right.
immediately we say, oh, the
It must be
sulfites
the
are giving me
sulfites.
a headache.
Right.
And it's really not true. It's the only food product that doesn't have a list of ingredients on the back. Actually, this wine, I think, is 14% alcohol.
Yeah,
Right?
baby.
15.
15? Okay. So the other 85% of this contents of that bottle of wine should be, and only be, water. If it's just water and alcohol, okay, then I guess you don't really need to list anything on the back of the label. But if you're adding coloring agents, aroma agents, flavoring agents, all these different things, that should be told to you on the back of the label, which it's not,
100%.
right? So
Yeah.
that's the big problem. Now they're in court right now trying to change that.
That's wonderful.
However, just like your food,
Uh-huh.
the names of that stuff, we
Yeah.
read it and go, oh, what the hell? You can barely pronunciate half
If
of
you
them.
can't pronounce it, you shouldn't be
Yeah,
eating
right.
it.
So that's the difference here. After all the years I've been in the wine business, the thing that I want is kind of the wines that I started off with when I was 5 years old, in the vineyard with my dad. Just naturally grown fruit and plants and healthy soil, which gives me great grapes. Great grapes give me great wine.
So that's what I
You
want to
know?
know about him.
And
Yeah, me
and
too.
that's
I
the
want
most
to. I want to
important.
know. I want to know all that, like how you grew up.
I want to know all about your childhood, and I want us to insert like a flashback little little sound effect, kind of like.
I feel like that's more like a Wayne's World. Or
Yeah.
Well,
something.
that's all I had.
Okay. Okay.
That's the best I could do.
Well, but, so that's one of my questions for you is how did you grow up in this world of wine and get all this vast amount of knowledge that you have
I
about?
think basically my father, Italian American, always made wine every year.
And where were you?
And so, well, we were kind of spread out. So my dad had been in California, yeah, but I wasn't even born yet, right? And so when he was transferred back to the Midwest with work, he had sold off his land in California, moved back to the Midwest, and then he went down really to Arkansas in the Eureka Springs area.
Okay.
And for a variety of reasons, but one of which was there was enough land there, and there was a creek, river that ran through the property and everything else. And he's like, I'm gonna plant some vines here. Wasn't doing anything like professionally, right? It was a passionate hobby of his. But so mom and dad had split and so on. So summers were spent with dad, and so his summer was spent in the vineyards. So we would always.
Which I've never
since
heard
I was-
about wine from Arkansas.
No, and you probably
Yeah.
won't. He also bought land up in Missouri,
Okay.
in a place called Augusta, Missouri. And so most people never heard of wine from Missouri.
No.
In actuality, Augusta, Missouri is America's first AVA, agricultural or viticultural area.
Okay.
So like all throughout California, any winery is an AVA, right? And so Augusta, Missouri was the first.
Funny.
And at one time was like the second largest growing region in the country. People don't associate the two. You have to go back to Prohibition for that. Prohibition happened, and the very next day, they showed up with sledgehammers and everything else, and they just wiped out everybody's inventory and stocks. Unless you were religious, you were using your wine for religious purposes. So
And
a
that's
lot
why there's
of
so
that,
many churches in the Midwest.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's why we have as many churches as we have bars. Yeah. Oh yeah.
So that what that did though is wipe out the history, and then Prohibition is lifted, and things start to people are starting to get back into it, and so on. But that takes decades, right? And so today Augusta, Missouri is a bustling, thriving, wine country, and so for me. What my dad used to talk about when we were, as a kid in the vineyards, was the soil, right? And so he always was very attentive to the soil. And as a 5 and 6-year-old kid, I was wondering, why can't we, use that stuff that mom uses in the backyard and just, instead of me being 6 years old out there pulling weeds and other things. And he looked at me very, I can remember it like it was
What is
yesterday.
wrong
It was
with
like,
you?
what's wrong with you? What are you talking about? Are you going to spray the? Absolutely not. So that kind of got me curious, and then we talked about the health of the soil. And we were in a forested zone, both in Augusta, Missouri, and in Arkansas. So we were surrounded by forest. And so as I started to get a little bit older, I was always wondering, you need sunlight. The forest kind of blocks out the sun, but it's that's one key thing. But the biggest thing about forested areas or forested vineyard locations is that you have debris that falls every year from the trees and the plants and the flowers and everything else that might be out there. Wild fruit trees, walnut trees, almond trees, all that stuff. It all falls to the ground. And what then ends up happening is that you have what's called mycelium, which is a fungi family. And the mycelium will deteriorate it and make it so that the insects that are in your ground come out and eat it. And then as they pass it, it's what turns into soil.
Right.
And so it's a healthy, rich soil. Now, if we're in a lot of these modern kind of new world areas where they're spraying every year, insecticides and pesticides and fungicides and just herbicides, and you're killing off all those insects, right? So you no longer have healthy soil, you have dirt.
Right.
Right? And so we have to use more chemicals next year
Yeah.
because our soil's not healthy. Therein lies a big problem. And then if you're watering and irrigating, whether it's drip irrigation or whatever, that water is going into the ground, and then your roots are going to absorb it, and then it's going into your plant and your
It's so
fruit.
fascinating, like the difference good soil will make with the finished product.
Absolutely.
I recently had gone out to add Wigmore for it's like a cleanse, like a detox. It was like a 2-week kind of cleanse the body thing. And you can have as much wheatgrass as you want there.
Yeah.
And I drink wheatgrass regularly, but it's like the powdered form. And it's, it's wheatgrass. It's
Right.
like swamp juice, right? So it's not good, but we do it for our
Yeah,
health.
right.
But they make all their own soil there.
Yeah.
And so I went and made my own wheatgrass, and it was so sweet
Completely different.
and delicious.
Right.
And it was like, holy moly, this is not the same thing.
Right. It's-
All because of the soil.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, and I'm sure other things too.
The soil is so
but still.
important, and the fungi network, that's breaking it down. So like I'm in Tuscany, and people are like, oh, I smell wild herbs in the wine, and Clem Borkowski here in Palmas, resident, him and I were tasting wines out of a tank that I had finished and so on, and we had just he was there just the year before, and we went mushroom hunting, and we're constantly out in the forest, foraging for mushrooms. And the porcini mushroom, it's kind of like one of the king of mushrooms, is very prominent there because it's on oak forest. and
Where was
find-
this?
In Tuscany, in Montalcino.
Okay.
We were tasting the wine, and we had just got done talking about, porcini, hopefully we can have some for dinner tonight or whatever. And you put your nose in the glass, and all of a sudden this waft of mushroom comes,
This is what I want to do when we're in Italy
Yes.
this fall.
Yeah. It changes your
one I would
whole
love.
perspective.
I have this, very much I Love Lucy like bucket list item that I would love to stomp on some grapes. Like I don't know if it'll happen, but it is a bucket list item for me. So if it does, magical. If I end up just going into the forest and picking mushrooms, I'm good with that too.
We can do
Didn't-
both.
I was like, Jason already told you could stomp grapes.
Well, I know, but I just putting it out there as so another person knows.
Right. It's
Anthony makes dreams come true.
Yeah, this wine is delicious, by the way.
so and just to wrap up, so that was how I got my kind of
Start.
start.
Wine
let's say.
start.
As
Wine
a
start.
Wine
teenager,
start.
my mother, my stepfather, had a wine cellar collection. You got to understand that back then, we're going back into like early 80s, he built and bought his wines for cellar and cellaring and so on. But back then, you weren't buying California wines or Australian wines. South Africa wasn't even in the market yet. Chile was a new wine that hit the market later, and it was all $6 a bottle. And everyone's like, oh, my God, did you taste that Chilean wine? It's only $6 a bottle. But you weren't buying those wines to put in your wine cellar. Mainly back then, it was French. And a smattering of Italians if you traveled enough and whatever. When I started tasting, I tasted all throughout my childhood, but started tasting as a teenager more and more and getting more, involved in that part of it. And I cut my teeth more or less on European wines. So as the New World wines emerge, New World being, South Africa, America, Chile, and Australia, my palate was driven back toward the European, wine, what I grew up
Yeah.
with. And so you guys all hear me talk about New World wines, and sometimes I get very animated, and some people call me the angry wine guy because I'm, screaming and yelling
Can we
about
talk
the
to
wine.
him for a little bit?
What's that?
Can we talk to him for a little bit?
Yeah, he'll come out. So it's not that I'm putting New World wines down, or I like wine from all over the world. What I don't like is the processes that are happening now.
Oh, yeah.
What I don't like is the farming practices.
Yeah.
And I certainly don't like when I know those wines are, let's call it manipulated, and you guys are going out to a nice dinner at a restaurant, and it's a $220 bottle of wine because it's your anniversary or a birthday, and you're buying these wines at a restaurant prices that are extremely high, that bothers me. And what also bothers me is going to the store and spending $50, $60, $80 on what you think is a very nice wine because the price is expensive, and you've seen this name before, or you may have seen it in a magazine or a wine critic. But what that wine critic isn't telling you, they're it's 96 points, and all that stuff.
Is any of the wine okay at source? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, you unfortunately have to be able to do your homework. And today we have the cell phones in front of us. So if you're walking through the store and you've got an extra 10, 15 minutes to pick out some wine, obviously if the label's very gimmicky, that's your first indication.
Yeah.
Barefoot on it, or you know what I mean.
Not trying to name names.
So
that's
your first
that stuff
indication.
gives me an immediate headache.
Yeah.
Immediate. I can't drink that stuff.
No.
It's no.
You got to be able to type in real quick, and then the website should, pop up. Who's natural? They should be writing it on the back of the label: natural product, organic farming, to help us. But they don't do that for the most part. Mm-hmm. So you're kind of left on your own out there, unless you call me. So that's the only thing that bothers me. Being in the business, being in making wine and doing all that, I know what the wine kind of costs to produce. And I see these manipulated wines. We call them technical wines because you're and they're $75 and so on, and then everybody's, oh my God, did you see this wine I've got? Or I got a bottle of the so and so and blah 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 blah, and I'm sitting there going, it's hard. Listen, 20, 30 years, but 20 years in the commercial business. I've been in wine 30 years, and if you add my childhood, longer. It was always important, and I was always told, you have to have professional courtesy. So if you're at a wine tasting event and I've got my table and then there's tables of other wineries, I'm not going to turn to you and go, oh, don't try that guy's wine, it sucks, right?
Right.
So you have to have professional courtesy, and always been really hard for me to do, but you had to. That was the job, more or less. I'm not in that world anymore. So who's my professional courtesy going to go to? That kind of a wine or winery that is, I know, manipulating and making bad technical wine that's going to give you a headache. Nowadays, I can just tell you straight out. You mentioned Jason earlier. The first time I did a tasting with him, he was naming off all these big names, and I'm like, oh, that sucks. And that wine's horrible. And why are you drinking that? Yeah. And that's how I get angry wine guy. Because I'm like, what are you doing? What are you thinking? That's horrible.
Jason, don't do that.
What's the matter with you, right? And so he was, but wait a minute, that's such and such name. That's a famous winery. So what does that have to do with it?
Yeah, it's all about marketing.
And so I can get a little
feisty.
Yes.
It's like with anything else.
You, though.
It's like with anything else these days. You have to look at every single label because it's all marketing. You'll say, the box will look like it's this health food product. Yeah. Oh, healthy this, blah, blah, blah. And then you look at the back and you see seed oils and all these words that you can't pronounce. And you're like, how is that healthy?
It's not.
It's not. What, you have one ingredient in there that's healthy, so you get to call it healthy? Sorry.
And when we say organic in our country,
in our country, do you mean the U.S. or do you mean
United
Italy?
States?
Okay.
I'm sorry. Still my country.
This fine country.
So, but we say organic. Well, in order to get the organic certification, you can still use certain percentages of all these other different things.
Exactly.
And you can still put additives in there. And if you meet this little percentage,
the SAD minimum,
right? You can the SAD minimum, and you can say, oh, it's organic, and then you write that on the label.
Yeah.
And then you're in the store.
And you see it's
and
organic.
You see it's
you're
organic.
like,
You're like, oh,
yay."
thank God I found an organic
What
wine.
happened to integrity?
Yeah, it's gone. And it's like a free-range chicken. That means he's been out of the cage for 15 minutes a day.
That means he had eye shot of a 10-foot little square that we'll never make it to, but he could see it.
You can
It's
see it.
there.
So it's
It's
free
there.
range, and so that's
I need some more.
being at home, or I should say being in Italy. When we write free range, or when we say grass fed, and when we say that the cattle are allowed to roam, we mean it. This wine is easy to drink. Yes.
It's very easy to
Right?
drink. It's going down very smoothly.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite tasty. Quite tasty.
So if you
Okay.
smell it,
Oh,
Oh,
okay.
okay.
you taste through your nose, huh? So smell it, and you might be able to pick
let me
up.
really get into the mic.
Yeah. You pick up minerals. It's very minerally, right? And it has great minerals, real fresh aroma. It's been done in concrete.
Explain
And-
that, because I didn't even know that this was a thing until you
I
mentioned
didn't
it.
either until
Like, I just
until the
assumed-
last wine tasting.
I honestly just assumed it's all barrels.
So the concrete is something we've been using for well over 100 and some odd years now. So concrete is somewhat porous, right? So the mix that makes concrete, and if you go back in time, there was no chemical stuff to add and all of
The original concrete.
The original concrete. Porous, so when the wine kind of absorbs into that porous concrete, it can extract some of the minerals, because cement is made with rock and stones and so on, and that's where all the mineral comes from.
Right.
And so that's why I said it's got this minerally kind of aroma and flavor. I think Walt Teeter mentioned calcium, right? And so on. So concrete is also mixed with glass, so that it's easier to clean and so on. And so you get a very fresh flavor, or aroma, I should say. You pick up the mineral in the aroma. The fruit is very lively and fresh. When I do barrel fermentation or barrel aging, the wood has a different reaction, which is also porous, but it's absorbing into the wood. Like those small barrels you guys see in every winery around, you can use those for 2.5, 3 years, and they're pretty much saturated and done. And then they go off to bourbon and whiskey and scotch and whatnot.
Oh, sure.
And they've been charred, toasted, and you have light toast, light plus, medium plus. Yeah, you have all these different toasting levels. Well, that just affects the actual flavors of the wine. So in the new world, and I'll say California a lot, is really the wood and the oak is the star of the show. Not the grape, not the grape skin, not the seed of the grape, not the sugar and water that comes out of the pulp. It's oak. And so here, when we use concrete, we get this beautiful minerality. It's a very fresh aroma. It's not so much driven on flowers, but the actual skin of the fruit, and you can actually smell the fruit. A lot of times we put our nose in a glass and we smell flowers. It might be red flowers, it might be white flowers, it might be, whatever it might be, but you get that floral aromas coming out and so on. Or in an oaked wine, a heavy oaked wine, just nothing but oak, right? It just comes right out at you. Now, as you were saying, kind of tasty. So this wine is I want you to make them cooler than that when you drink those other ones. So just a slight coolness to that would bring out a tasty fruit. It's like tasty and almost. I want to say crunchy on your
This
palate.
is a question that I actually have always wondered about, because I don't know much about this area, so I really appreciate you being here. But like, as far as wines, like, how do you know what temperature to have a wine at?
Today again, you have Google.
But if it wasn't for Google, like,
What do you mean?
I don't have a phone. I don't have technology. How at some point somebody said, we need to keep this chilled,
Yeah.
but not this one.
Well, you
They
hear
tasted,
room
they
temperature.
tasted it and they're like, "That's gross.
Yeah.
Let's chill
Well,
it."
that's the thing, right?
Yeah, that makes it better.
if we've been told over the years, drink your red wines at room temperature.
Yeah.
We're in Puerto Rico right now,
Yeah.
so thankfully you got the AC running. But if you didn't have, if we were sitting outside, that ain't room temperature, right? European wine or old world wine or traditional wines are made more acidic structure, again, for cuisine. It's the acidity that's pairing with your food. The acidity, brings out, the flavors and holds everything together, if
Yeah.
that makes sense. Holds your aromas and flavors together, right? Sugar is real simple and easy and sweet and, delicious, but it just washes down. There's no structure, no acidic structure to hold it onto your palate, so to speak. And when you have a red wine or even a white that's got a firm acidic structure to it because it was made for cuisine and it's too warm, the acidity is almost burning,
Yeah.
right? And it becomes like almost, I don't want to use the word sour, but, it's almost
Yeah, you can like
bittery
feel
or-
it.
Yeah, it's
that's
too, and that's what turns most New World wine drinkers away from Old World wines, is because of the acidity, right? So we want those red wines a bit cooler, and how you figured that out, or how the world figured that out, is by pulling corks and drinking, and you know what I mean. And it was like, somebody at one point said, I can't drink that. It's just it's burning. I wish it was a little colder. And then all of a sudden the light bulb went on.
Ding ding.
Hey, let's cool this thing down and see what it tastes like then, right? Not cold, but cool, right? White wine, Chardonnays, and certain white wines and sparkling wines are great when they're nice and cold and they're refreshing and so on. But a Chardonnay, a fuller-bodied white wine, I want to drink it closer to room temperature than I do cold, because too cold, now you're not really tasting anything.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So you'll taste the oak, that's there for sure, but you're not really tasting the Chardonnay fruit.
Yeah.
And the whole point of all of these different grape varietals and all that, so that you can taste the fruit.
Yes.
When you bite into an apple, it's because you're in the mood for an apple.
Yes.
Right? You don't bite into an orange and go, wow, that apple was really, does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so I think it's just trial and error over the years. That
Do you have a favorite wine that's kind of like your go-to?
Well,
Or does it really just depend on like what you're eating?
a lot of it depends on what I'm eating. A lot of it depends on the mood and the group
Let's say
I'm
let's
with.
say you're not eating and you just want a glass of wine.
I would drink something like this.
This is a little bit lighter, isn't
It's
it?
lighter.
Yeah.
So you notice in the finish that the wine stands up on the back of your palate, but it's just not a wine that's made for like, long-term aging, and it's very complex, and we've done all these different, things. We're making this wine to do exactly what it's doing. Be fresh, tasty, a little crispy almost, and in the back of your palate, and the reason why I can have, just cheeses and maybe some prosciutto or whatever, is because it's not so complex, right?
Yeah.
And it's a perfect afternoon wine.
Yeah,
It's
this
perfect.
is really actually lovely because
Yeah.
a lot of times when I'm like at lunch or whatever and I'm wanting wine, I don't want
a big heavy
red
or
and
an
so,
acidic grip
so I
on it, yeah.
naturally go to like a Sauvignon Blanc or
Right.
something like that.
Right.
But this is a wine that I could have
You
at
can
lunch.
drink this during the afternoon. You can drink this early evening. This is how I would start. Be like a great starter wine. You've got charcuterie board on the table, and friends are coming over, and this will go perfectly with different cheeses and all that stuff.
Do-
So I feel like we need to say what wine we're drinking. We
Oh,
didn't,
I'm sorry.
right?
Support the brand. This is
It's a
good stuff.
2022 Swanti.
Swanti
Is
is the name of the person at the winery,
Okay.
right?
It's a La Vedetta.
La Vedetta is the name of the winery, and this is
This is
referring
Italian,
to a
yes?
vista.
Yes.
It's referring to the view.
La Vedetta.
Yes, this particular
delicious.
wine is a blend. It comes from Piemonte, and so it's a blend of Barbera and Nebbiolo, right?
It
so
does
there's
not
two
say
different,
that on here. It says Barbaresco.
Okay, so Barbaresco is the zone
Okay.
where those grapes were grown in.
Interesting.
So Piemonte is the region,
Mm-hmm.
and then within the regions, you have all what I call them districts. So that wine that you is a very Barbarescos are very famous wines. They're cellarable, they're long living, and all that. And so in the Barbaresco zone is where these grapes are grown. This is something that's made to be exactly what it is. Lively, I almost want to use the word zesty on your palate.
Yeah, I would definitely say zesty.
It's got
some
great
zest.
mineral.
It's the white wine of reds.
Pretty much. I mean, you know, at the end of the day, but what was the alcohol content on there?
15%.
It definitely is 15%. I feel good.
Yeah, so, you know, usually lighter style wines don't reach that 15%. So that is really coming down to, in a winery like this, down to the actual vintage year. is
Do
what determines
Italians
that.
drink wine with every meal?
We drink it every day.
So no, not every day. Every meal. Do you
Every
have?
meal
Is
is-
it kind of a thing? So does
Absolutely.
wine, good wine, does it actually aid in like digestion and everything?
Absolutely the most important part, right?
Amazing.
And so acidity in your wine not only brings out aromas and helps with, you know, keeping the structure of the wine and holding all the flavors and everything together, but acidity is vital for your digestion. And so again, remember I was saying your stomach almost goes into trauma at the end of the night after drinking a bunch of kind of commercial or technical wines. You don't feel your muscles are tightening the same way that when you're talking or you sneeze or you laugh, you know, you don't realize it, but your muscles are tightening. Well, digestion is that's the whole thing, right? Most of our illnesses these days come from poor digestion.
Yeah.
And that's because of the poor quality food,
Yeah.
right? So, the great thing about these wines, and part of the whole food and wine thing together, is that the wine helps you digest your food. And it's that acidity. So, you know, there's just a couple of components here, right? It's a grape. So on the skin of the fruit is vitally important, and where some of our acidic structure comes from. But when we press that fruit, we have seeds inside those grapes, and there's your strong acidic structure. And the pulp, it's just sugar and water.
Right.
So the winemaker's job is to balance these components out, right? And then we have to make that decision. Am I going in American oak, French oak, Hungarian oak, Austrian, basically oak? Am I not going to oak? Should we put this in concrete? Maybe we should use stainless steel. And so when you change your dynamic and your approach to making your wine based on what Mother Nature gave you that year, for me is more of a real approach to making, you know, really great wines year in, year out. This next wine that comes out in 2020, this wine 2023 will not taste like this.
Right.
It's going to be completely different. 2021 was different. 2020 is different. 2019 is different. They're all
Yeah.
different. And so I want a farmer. If I ask a winemaker, you know, hey, what should I title? And I ask that intentionally. And I'll say, so how should I address you? Are you a winemaker? You want me to call you an enologist? Do you know? And if the answer comes back that, no, I'm a farmer, then I'm on track, right? Because the farmer's connected to his soil, just like my father was, and the farmer's connected to each individual vine, right? And that farmer is like insanely, you know, hell-bent on growing the very best fruit that he can or she can. And therein lies, again, great grapes make great wine. And so the actual pressing the fruit and going into fermentation, my 11-year-old daughter can do that. You know, I did it when I was her age. The development of the wine, how to take what you got that year and put it all together, and, you know, already have that vision of where I want this to go and where I want it to be. Do we hit it on the head all the time? No. sometimes when we do, it's remarkable, right? So that's to me one of the most important parts of this whole thing, and what I look for in my wineries and the people that I work with today. Yeah, I want you guys to drink clean, healthy, delicious wine. Now,
We want that too.
Your hubby and yours is like a different style of wine, right? They like that more kind of. We say full-bodied, but really
I like that style as well.
Well, it's full flavor, and so what happens in that balance of acid and sugars that you got out of the grape? What are we going to focus on if I'm making those kind of wines? I'm going to focus on the sugar and lean back on the acid.
It's really fascinating because when I first started drinking wine, and Sean was the same way, it was only about like the very sweet wines, like
Right.
a Moscato or a white Zinfandel.
Gross.
I know, but for me, white Zinfandel was my first wine that I ever, and I immediately went into Riesling. And maybe this is common.
It's very common.
And then so
how everybody starts.
Riesling moved to Pinot Grigio, which moved to Chardonnay, and then from Chardonnay I moved into reds.
Right.
And now I can't drink those wines.
Yeah, so that's the unfortunate part right now. What you're saying is that progression is natural, right? Everybody, and when I say everybody, I mainly am talking about.
At least I didn't have like Boone's Farm in there or anything
well,
like that. I mean,
I thought you did.
Yeah, you just don't remember that one.
Didn't we talk about this on
It
Swiders?
doesn't count if it was before you were of legal age.
Oh,
So think, everybody starts that way, even when you were kids, right? And like because in Italy or in France and Greece and all of Spain, and everything, kids always get wine. We mix it with water and we break it down, but sweet wine is easier for the kids to palate, right? And we're not allowed to, as Americans, we're not allowed to drink. We have to sneak it, or we have to, wait till we get to high school and go to a keg party,
That's so
or we're
stupid.
doing all that. And so we're not used to that. And because most of the Europeans that came to settle America, they came from Northern Europe, right? So Northern Europe back in the day, they didn't grow any grapes. Their wine wasn't part of their culture. Beer, Scotch, whiskey, right? So when
Right.
they came over, we had, a
That's
couple
what they
hundred
brought.
years of that as our tradition, beer and whiskey and all that. The Southern Europeans went around the bottom and came up through, Mexico and so on. And then they go up through California, and they brought their own grape seeds, grape cuttings, and started to plant as when they stopped in Mexico and California. You notice they were all of Catholic, basically Christianity, but Catholic was the... So look at the names of California today. You have Sacramento, Los Angeles, Santa Barbara, Santa Maria. Everything was about,
Santa.
you know what I mean? So, but that's how that culture started to happen over on that side. From the eastern side came all the northern Europeans. The southern Europeans came around, and they were Spanish, and they were trying to convert, Indians into Christianity and so on.
Right.
And then you start to get these mass migrations in the 1800s, and then in the early 1900s from Italy and from other, and they brought that culture. Now you can go to, New York and all these different places where Italians were, and Chicago and all that, and you have that Southern Italian kind of influence, right? And that's how all of this stuff started to kind of take hold in America. But it took a century or more for us to start getting into wine. So our first reaction to wine, especially European wine, was, ooh, the acid. Ooh, it's a little tart. Oh, I don't know. So we start drinking Rieslings or sweeter style wines, right? And then we, like you just laid out the perfect progression, that
So funny. I started at Chardonnay.
No,
I never liked the
sticky sweet.
sweets.
Yeah.
And I still don't.
And so this is my problem, though.
I
Unfortunately,
still do not like a Merlot though. Ugh.
Yeah.
Not a
I
fan.
think it depends. I've had decent Merlots.
Listen, first, we got to come full circle, right? So you started with white zin.
Oh yeah.
And then you went, and today now you're only reds, and I can't drink those white wines or those sweet style wines. Some of those sweet wines are the most expensive and most delicious wines on the planet. And Riesling is so important, grape and wine. It's a refreshing drink. It's considered by the wine community as one of the greatest wines on the planet. But since you started off drinking Blue Nun and Black Tower and all that commercial stuff,
Black Tower and Blue Nun.
you don't remember those?
No.
Blue Nun.
Come on. Really? Okay. Well, you started drinking Riesling. But those were all commercial wines, and it got to the point where you just can't do it anymore.
Yellowtail.
Yeah.
That's
Mine was
Australian.
Kendall Jackson.
Yeah. Sure.
Oh,
KJ Chardonnay.
there
Yeah.
you go.
That was big. Well, it still is, I guess.
Yeah.
But now that you're drinking reds, not as much as you used to, but come back to a well-made Riesling, a Moscato d'Asti. Yes, that wine comes from Asti. So the white wine of that area
Oh.
is the Moscato d'Asti.
Interesting.
You're drinking a Barbera and Nebbiolo that were grown in Asti, right? So they're sisters to this wine. So don't put them away. Don't turn your head and say, "Oh, I can't drink that stuff anymore. That was horrible." Because what you were drinking was starter
Crap.
wines.
Yeah.
Which is why
but,
I bought a white.
I want you
and
to go
shocked
back.
you.
That white wine you bought is magnificent,
Yeah,
and
it's
it's
really good.
8.5 years old. Yeah.
Yeah, you did shock me with that.
I know.
And
It's beautiful.
And now I'm so intrigued by it. It's like
Maybe
I
I'll
wanna,
invite you over and share it with you.
that would be very nice. In 10 years, we can open that one in 10 years.
That one's already 8.5
Yeah.
years old. So
Okay, in 2
A year-
years,
in a year and a half.
year and a half.
put it down on the calendar right now so you don't forget.
Okay.
But
It's cute that you
Merlot-
think that I can actually wait to open a bottle. It's not gonna happen.
Get back to that Merlot,
Okay. Yeah.
right? So what did we do in let's call it, I'll just use California as the example. We were trying to get you away from Kendall Jackson Chardonnay and you away from your whites, and we needed to convert you into red. So we used Merlot. And of Merlot, there's probably 16, if not more, clone varietals of Merlot. So the original Merlot, the original one that pollinated out in the field naturally 500 years ago, however long it was, that Merlot is in France, and that's where it started from. That's its home, is in Bordeaux, France. And so, but what we're doing in California is hybriding them. You're cloning them with different varietals and everything, and it's still called Merlot, but that's not a typical Merlot that, like a true French Bordeaux Merlot, right? That Merlot grape makes one of the absolute most sought after wines in the world, and it's one of the most expensive wines in the world. And if you drank or tasted, a real Merlot, I call it real Merlot, but if you tasted that side by side with the commercial stuff or the stuff that we tried in California to convert everybody to, it was everywhere Merlot for a long time. I mean, it was just Merlot. There was a Merlot craze going on. And those Merlots were technical wines. And so
I feel like Merlot got a bad rap because
It
of
should.
Sideways.
yeah, that's what he was taught. That's why he said that in
Right.
the movie. Listen, Bordeaux, our Cabernet Sauvignon. Well, from one side of the river in Bordeaux, Cabernet reigns king, and then you blend a small amount of Merlot, Cabernet Franc, Malbec. The original home of Malbec is in Bordeaux.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. Did
And
not know
so
that.
you drink a French Malbec versus an Argentina Malbec. They're in two different hemispheres, two different weather patterns.
I do
two
love a
different
South
everything.
America Malbec.
I do
Yeah.
too.
And they're today getting much better and better and better.
But
and
I
better.
haven't. I haven't I don't think I've ever had a Malbec from anywhere else.
don't
So
know
I
that
would
I've
have
had it.
people say I only drink Cabernet Sauvignon. So I said, well, listen, I got this beautiful French Bordeaux. And they said, well, you know what? I've had those before, and I didn't really like it. It's too tart. It's a little bit burny on my palate. So I just stick to California Cabernet. And I'm like, well, your Cabernet in California, let's call it 96% of them are a Bordeaux blend. It's Cabernet, Merlot, Cabernet Franc, all those same grapes are used. We just write Cabernet Sauvignon because 75% of the contents is Cabernet Sauvignon. So by law, we just have to write Cabernet Sauvignon. It doesn't tell you on the back of the label well, some of them do, but they don't tell you all the different blends. So I'm like, well, if you're drinking that, then you should love a Bordeaux. What didn't you like about it? It was too tart because it's a French wine that was made for cuisine. We make our wines in the New World to drink. Yes?
The old world drinks it with food.
Food. That's food and wine were married together 2,000 years ago. They never were divorced. They got a divorce when they moved to
The new world.
the New World. Right? So, listen, 95% of wine that is purchased today around the world will be consumed today.
Yep.
Yes? No one's buying it to hold on to it. No one's putting it in a wine.
Which is why Bex is upset today.
I am
Yes.
upset because I can't wait 10 years to drink a wine. That's silliness.
Well, if you start buying it correctly,
Fine.
you'll have plenty of wine. You have wines to drink. You have wines for a nice occasion at home. You have wines that you're not going
wines
to touch, and
to
you're going to let
wait.
them
You
develop.
have wines that just sit in your wine fridge
They
until
just,
until Anthony says you can drink them.
I mean, it's
Fine.
you don't have to wait 10 years from the harvest date. Like I said, that's why we have decanters and we open them and let them breathe. Oxygen softens acid. Right? So if your young Italian wine is a little bit too tart, you leave it in the bottle and micro amounts of oxygen will come through that cork.
He said young Italian.
Right? And
Young Italian.
and so that's why we're letting it breathe. The oxygen, it's breathing oxygen, which is softening the acid. And as the acid begins to soften, the aromas and the flavors will start to emerge. So if you buy a wine that's like, oh, this is a fantastic vintage, I love this producer, it's not ready to drink yet. But man, in about 2, 3, 4, I buy enough to where I can have some over the years to see how it's changing and evolving because of the oxygen that's coming in through the cork. That's what the barrel is for. We integrate oxygen during production. We integrate oxygen through the barrel. And then we put it in the bottle and put a cork in it because it's going to give you more oxygen. You guys get it home, you pull the cork and you let it breathe, more oxygen.
So I have a question for you. What's the screw off caps versus cork? What's the difference in oxygenation?
Oxygenation. The screw cap is not.
You're not getting anything.
You're not getting any oxygen. So when I make a wine, again, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with a
people
screw
have
cap.
said that it's fine, right?
There's
But-
nothing wrong with a screw cap, but I'm not buying my screw cap wine so that
To
I can
hold
see
for-
what exactly.
Okay.
You're buying that
To drink
to drink
now.
tonight.
Yeah, or
Got
over
it.
the next year,
Okay.
whatever.
That makes sense.
Right? So, but now all of a sudden we start to see some countries going exclusively screw cap. You'll notice New Zealand and Australia and Austria. A lot of Swiss wines are going screw cap, 100%. It's cheaper. And
Well, isn't cork going away? Isn't there an
No.
issue with cork?
so
Let's
they
talk
use,
about that.
They use that as an excuse.
Okay.
Of course, there's
Because it's more expensive.
Well,
so they're
there's
saying
only
that.
one, 2 places on the planet that, cork trees grow, right?
Why do I feel like when I was in Portugal?
Oh
and
my
there's,
God. This is something I've never thought about before.
What?
There's cork trees.
Yeah.
I didn't think about that. That it was this. I'm so sorry to interrupt, but this was like an
Cork-
this
cork
is
trees.
amazing. I did not realize that there
Yeah.
was a specific cork
Right.
tree.
My thought is there's cork shops where they've got all of these cork products cork bags and
Yeah.
whatever.
Portugal is the main country where the cork trees grow.
Okay.
Sardinia is another area.
Okay.
We have a lot of cork tree there. And
So there's really no shortage.
yes,
per se.
there is a
Okay.
shortage because
Okay.
there's not a lot of cork trees, and they only grow in a couple of small areas.
Right.
So we could make a
Right.
fortune if we just grow a bunch of cork trees.
Yeah, but you got to be in the right climate, in the right place, in the right, And so what happens? Somebody, brought this to, this argument to me. We were talking about screw cap versus cork, and
Then did the angry wine guy come out?
Yeah, so I said, listen, everybody wants to be sustainable and this and that and carbon footprints and all of this kind of stuff, and I only do natural and this and that, and then you're going to the store and buying a wine with a metal screw cap. You're so worried about the plastic and that metal cap is never going to disintegrate either, just like your plastic, right? At least the plastic does kind of break down, unfortunately, not enough. But so if you're so environmentally aware,
Yeah, you'd think you'd rather
why
have
are
cork.
you?
Rather
Yeah,
have
you'd
cork,
rather the
absolutely.
cork, right? And then she turned to me and she goes, "Yeah, well, you're just cutting down all the trees just to make your corks for your bottle." I said, "Wait a minute." I didn't say what I wanted to say, but a cork tree, we actually shave the trunk of the tree. So the tree's never cut down. The skin
gets
of the
a haircut.
It
It's
gets
like
a
sheep.
haircut. Exactly.
We just give it a haircut.
Absolutely. And then the other argument is that sometimes the cork will fail. It's a natural product.
Yeah.
And so sometimes there's a bacteria inside that trunk of that tree, or the
Yeah.
the bark, let's call it, and you can't detect it. So statistically, 1 out of every, I think it's 300 or 300 plus bottles, a cork will be tainted, and then it taints your wine,
Right.
right?
Oh, that's interesting.
And so
That's why it
you
gets corked.
That's why we call it corked. Don't
Bad-
throw it away.
Bad wine gets corked.
Listen, don't throw
You
it
know that,
away.
right?
If you cook with it, the minute it heats up, all that burns away, and you
so you can cook with
you
the
can
bad,
cook with
bad
it.
wine.
Exactly.
Bad, naughty,
Or you
naughty
take it
wine.
back to the store and tell them,
Yeah.
hey, it's corked and I want to
Yeah.
exchange, right? Anybody should refund your money for that, right? But that's the thing about cork versus screw cap. The difference is the screw cap, when I make the wine, I'm not going to go through many of the different production methods and enhancement methods, whether that be aging in oak or doing all these other things, because the wine's not. It is. I have to make it for you to open it and drink it right now, and that's going to be at its perfect level, right? But now I'm seeing $30 and $40 and $50 bottles of wine that have a screw cap on it, and I know how that's made.
Yeah.
It's young and fresh and delicious. It's kind of like this. You could use a screw cap with this wine if you're going to drink it. And
Right.
it's young and it's fresh and it's zesty and it's kind of whatever and easy. Use a corkscrew or
Delicious.
use a screw cap, no problem. If I'm making a wine for long term and aging with different complexities, and I
Use a
want this
good
thing-
cork.
You got to use a good cork, dude.
But what happens to a cork? Like the other day, I opened up a bottle of wine. I don't remember. I think it was like 2019, something like that. And I went to open it, and it completely crumbled.
Yeah.
I couldn't get it out. I had to
Yeah.
slowly work it out because it kept on crumbling.
Yeah, that's unfortunately here in Puerto Rico. You'll find this happening maybe a bit more, and the reason being is that the cork is drying out, and so
Which
when
seems it would be the opposite here because it's so humid.
No, because they're storing it, because it's so humid and hot, they're storing it in a refrigeration
Oh, sure.
or a warehouse so they put the warehouse and it's nice and cold in there. But if they don't bring in a humidifier to have that, it's like a cigar box.
Sure.
You want the humidity,
Right.
but not too much, but you know what I mean? So you have to regulate that.
Yeah.
So
Well, this is a
I have
lovely
a friend that has a warehouse, but there's no humidity in the warehouse. It's nice and cold. In fact, when you pull the bottles out, it's so cold in there that when you pull the bottles out and you go into it starts to beat up
Condensate.
and sweat. And so I mean, I'm like, well, you might be holding this bottle a little bit too cold. And then when I put my corkscrew in it, all of a sudden the thing just starts to crumble and break because it's too dry. On the other side of that coin, If your cork is too wet, it's going to happen as well. So when I hand you that cork at the restaurant, right, and you are to smell it, if that wine was corked or if that wine turned and turned bad or vinegary or something, you can pick up the aromas on the cork. But you're also supposed to squeeze and press on the cork to find if there's any buoyancy there. If it's hard as a rock, probably dried out. If it's too wet and too moist, it got saturated. And then the third thing is the mark on the bottom. Do you see the red mark where the wine was touching that? So if I saw that red mark cruise up the side of the cork all the way to the other top of it, the other side of it, then I know that the wine breached up top to the cork, and that is allowing oxygen to get into that wine. Oxygen is good for wine, and oxygen will kill your wine, right? So that doesn't mean that you don't drink it, because you still have to taste it, because it may have just happened a little bit, and it's not really affecting. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And so that's why you're handed the cork at the restaurant.
This is a nice cork.
Absolutely. It's important.
He's like, I know this. Of course it is.
It has to. It really has to be. And there's different levels.
There's bounce.
Yeah. Buoyancy, kind of.
Buoyancy with the squeezy.
Yeah.
The wine, the red part is like perfect.
Right.
It smells delicious.
Smells beautiful. And we just don't put all those things together.
Yeah.
One person at a time. When I'm
Well, this is education right here. Like,
it is.
Our audience, like, you get to learn all this stuff for the small price of free.
Yeah.
And just give us a like, follow us on Instagram and Facebook, and also YouTube.
Yeah.
And go on Apple Podcasts, please, and give us a 5-star review, because you love us. We want to hear it, though. It's our love language. We need to hear the words. Thank you.
Absolutely, very important. Yeah,
very important.
And speaking of love, they can go on Love for Wines with an S, Wines, and hit my Instagram account. Now, I don't get to do as much content. It's coming up, but. It's important. It's the only way I can communicate with a lot of folks.
I have one more question. Okay. So a while back, I did a wine tasting here, and it was French wine. It was all different French wines.
Yep.
And we bought a few bottles.
Yep.
And we noticed that there was like in this one bottle, there was a lot of sediment in the bottom. Is that bad? Is that a sign of anything? Like, was that okay?
I guess it depends on the sediment, right? So in an old wine that you're storing for years, there's a breakdown. The wine starts to break down, and so there's a natural sediment. That's what the hole on the bottom of the bottle's for, right? And in a younger wine, if you're getting that sediment, that's sometimes because the winemakers decided not to filter the wine when they went into bottling, right? And sometimes you'll filter out only a certain percentage, or so they just leave a little bit left in there. And some people just go completely, especially natural wine, just let it go. And so if it's natural, that's fine. I think sometimes too much sediment will affect the flavor and the texture that's on your tongue and so on, and sometimes in a negative way.
It was a little off-putting.
Yeah. And sometimes when they just use, some guys just let a little bit go through, that's okay. You got to know your wine, right? So if there's a little bit in there, that's cool. Some of these that I've had have a tiny bit of sediment at the bottom, and which is fine. When you're getting additives that have not settled or broken down in the wine, and you get this like white crystally, it's usually from artificial yeasts. Artificial yeast will change the texture of the wine. And sometimes you'll see remnants of that in a bottle or in your glass. So it depends on the sediment, and then it depends on the wine, Sometimes that extra sediment can give you some added color or added kind of a grippiness to the wine. And so I think it's a preference thing.
Okay.
And then again, an aged wine that's just going to be. I've got a wine at home that's almost 20 years old, and it was slightly unfiltered when it was bottled. And now over the past 20 years, that I noticed the sediment now is kind of growing a little bit. At least that's what it appears to be. So, yeah, the biggest thing about wine is that there's no 100% rule. You learn everything by pulling corks and tasting, right? So after you're done smelling, and you put that wine across your tongue, just don't try and taste anything. In fact, don't try and smell anything. When you're smelling it, does it smell pleasant? Who cares what I smelled? You're going to smell something different. She's going to smell something different. Everybody's got a different recall in their memory bank that's going to say, oh, this reminds me of grandma's closet, right? Because remember those old cedar wood closets in the back in the day where, and so I've had people go, oh, it just smells like my grandmother's closet, or,
that too.
Does that make sense? And so to just work on pleasant. And then when you're tasting wine, right, don't try and taste what the person just told you that, they taste or what they're going for. Again, does it taste pleasant? Where I need you to find, remember the winemaker's job, to balance the sugars and the acids. Yes. How is the oak, if it was oak ages, how is that integrated? Alcohol content. So that's what your tongue is for. So I need to take everything out of my mind, swish the wine around my tongue, get my tongue adjusted to that wine, take the second sip and feel where is it affecting my tongue. Do I have too much sugar or not enough?
I do that a lot where I drink the
have
wine
to.
and I let it just kind of hang out in my mouth for a while before I swallow, because it's like I'm trying to learn about the wine.
So you need the most important part of that is finding a well-balanced wine. Again, too much sugar, not enough. Too much oak, not enough. Too much alcohol, not enough. Too much acidity, not enough. If it's top of your palate, bottom of your palate, it's a nice finish where it's still lingering. And then it's you really taste your wine, all the stuff they told you to taste. It's after you swallowed the wine and you continue to what? Breathe. Here comes oxygen again. And it's
somebody told me once to chew your wine.
Yeah, the chewing it is to get your mouth adjusted to that. Each fruit has a different, and each wine has a different levels of acidity.
I suppose that would be somewhat oxygenating within your mouth.
You're doing that,
or if you eat with your mouth open.
Well,
I wouldn't with wine in there, because then it'd be like,
try and breathe.
I want you to. I want you to chew your next gulp. Yeah, I want you to chew it with your mouth open and tell me.
I'm not going to do it with
you know what?
tell me if it's any different.
Because then I'm going to have wine all over your couch.
When you smell it, keep your mouth open a little bit.
About to do it, guys.
And smell it through your nose, and then breathe it in through your mouth. So you're doing both. Yeah, I want you to breathe in through your mouth and breathe in through your nose. And when you taste it, the first sip has always got to be chewing your wine. Get it in there. Get your tongue saturated with it. And so teaching people how to taste. So once I find good balanced wine, now I got to make the determination, is this my style? Do I like this particular grape, or do I like this particular wine? If it's balanced, that's what you're looking for when the wine's on your tongue. And then you got to swallow it. After you swallowed it, keep talking, breathing, and about a minute, 2 minutes later, all of a sudden, what's left on your tongue, that after finish, is either pleasant or it's not. And if it's balanced, it should be really nice and pleasant. And you should start to taste the cherry and whatever that particular grape is giving.
I just feel really happy right now because this wine
is yummy.
It's balanced.
It's very well balanced.
It's time.
So what questions did you say you wanted to ask
so
me?
I feel like I don't have notes for you.
Uh-huh.
We didn't feel we needed them with you.
Some people you have to have notes to pull information from, but I know Anthony, and I wasn't worried about words coming out of his mouth. But I want to know more about you personally, because I know you and I've known you for, you were actually, I feel like I met you pretty early on here.
Yeah.
Wait, were you at the wine tasting at Cafe de la Plaza?
Yes.
So,
But I knew Anthony before
Before
that.
so I was at that one too. I didn't know Anthony before that one.
I actually I remember the first time I met you was actually at Richard Sparrow's house.
Richard Sparrows.
Yeah.
Aw.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was, I don't even know what it was for. If it was like a holiday or.
I think he
but
was doing one of his.
He had a bunch of meat, like a bunch
he
of
was
barbecue.
Smoking,
Yeah.
he's smoking
And
meat. Yeah.
and that was the first time I met you, and we hadn't been here, but maybe a couple months.
Yeah.
And of course, I meet the wine guy, and I'm like, I'm just gonna talk to him all night I
Because
don't-
you were always just kind of a wine girl.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then we had the opportunity to come see you in Italy.
Yeah.
Although we didn't get enough time with you, we only had a day, but
Yeah.
it was still
Get
a-
ready,
a
Sean and I are
wonderful
coming.
day.
We're gonna have some
I'm-
fun.
Maybe next year I can talk Joel into getting back out there when you're out there, and we can like go. Actually, I really want to go like hang out for like a month
Yeah. It's
in Tuscany and just
you can just unplug out there.
Yeah.
Turn that phone off.
Yeah,
You know.
that's what I'm
and
looking forward
Yeah.
to.
And I've lived there for so long now that.
yeah.
and
But so I want to hear the story behind that. Like how did that happen? And
Tell
then,
us about
and then
you.
also how is it working with like Becs and Aria, and because I know they're kind of like back and forth a little bit.
It's been a challenge, obviously, since COVID and all of that.
Right.
Right. So, but you want to know how I got there?
Well, yeah.
So,
I mean, I know you were in the wine business.
Yeah, I've always been in the wine business, and so my travels were always with a company, right? I won a sales.
So you were
know,
like a
deal.
company man back in the day.
I've been entrepreneurial most of my
a
career,
company
but there's
man.
sometimes where I worked with the Terlato Wine family,
Yeah.
Terlato Wines Internet, and I had my own distributorship in Arizona, and so. Yeah, but in between all of that, there was a lot of entrepreneurial stuff. We were doing direct to consumer before direct to consumer became a DTC. We kind of pioneered a lot of that for the wine industry, that is. But I when I used to go to Europe, it was with the company. So you're on the bus at 9 a.m. and then we're going to go to this winery, and then we're going to go. Lunch is at 11:45, and then you got to. It was such a regimented schedule, and you only went to the wineries that you're selling every day, and you already know these wines. So I always wanted to kind of like, okay, guys, I'll meet you back here in a few hours and
Right.
just go get lost in the, and so during that time, I had worked with so many different Italian wine companies and so on. It was about 2008. My brother had went out. He's also in the wine business, Anfora Wines. He went out to Tuscany to work with a supplier that we had known from years before, and obviously was loving it. He was living in San Gimignano, and some time had passed while he was there. I think he was only there for about 9 months at this point, maybe a year. And he had met some other folks, and one of which was another person that we knew from previous. And they were interested. It's a big winery. It's a big company, yeah. And they were interested in developing a new brand under their umbrella of their existing brands, right? And I guess it's no secret. You can see it on it's Castello di Mileto and Gaioli and Chianti. They wanted to develop a new kind of a brand just for direct to consumer. And so we developed the name, and my brother had called me and said, listen, I need you to come in and take over this project for me. And that's basically what I did. So you're out sourcing fruit. So if I got a 10-acre vineyard, right? Certain parts of that vineyard, certain blocks, are different sun exposure, maybe closer to the forest line, or these kinds of things. So I went out there and I studied all of that. Then I went out there and started picking fruit and tasting the grapes and what's the difference between this one and all that. And so I found my fruit. And we made 6 different wines. We called it Orazio de Cesare. And we developed our own labels, blah, 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 blah. And my brother ended up leaving that project and left me there. And so I continued on. It was about 3.5 years. And I was living there in Rada and Chianti, right next door to Gaioli. And nothing. So the new CEO came in. The old CEO retired. A new guy came in. Some different team members, and just like the other folks when I first got there, the other Italians that I was working with, they didn't like so much that the American guy was coming in and
Yeah.
Can't blame them
I
for
want
that.
this fruit and I want that, and they're all looking at me like,
Yeah.
so-
Who are you?
Yeah, who the f- are you? But once we all got to know each other, we had mutual respect, and
That's cool.
so basically, they wanted to do direct to consumer. So we started reaching out to all the private drivers, limo drivers, and picking you guys up and bringing you out to the winery and so on. And because
That's a lot of fun. I always enjoy that.
Yeah.
Renting a limo and just bopping to like different wineries.
in Tuscany is a little different because it's so spread out, right? And lunch is 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock, so don't try and change it. You're not going to stop someplace, right?
problem.
So it kind of interrupts the day. Like back in California, like we can just go, and then when we want to stop to eat, we'll stop and eat.
Right.
Right.
No.
There, you got to stop at 1 o'clock because otherwise you're not going to eat. Right.
Interesting.
So it breaks up the day, and it's such a long drive from Florence into some of these wine districts that you can only squeeze in maybe 3 wineries a day. If you're skipping lunch or eating in the back of the car, maybe you can.
Yeah, but who wants
get
to do
4.
that?
Nobody.
Dude,
right?
now I want to do this when I'm out there.
So you come out, and so I was the only guy, maybe one other guy, that really speaks English, right? So the drivers would hear people get back in their cars and vans and whatever to leave, and they were like, "Oh my God, that was great!
'Cause
I
they were
understood
with
everything
you."
he said," and so on
And you
and so forth.
explain it.
And
well.
my approach, right,
Yes.
was
It's
a
not
lot different. I wasn't there really to do the actual tastings at first, but I noticed that although very skilled and very knowledgeable and great personality, but the locals have a little bit of a language barrier there and don't know how to accent certain words, or the same way that I'm speaking Italian, I butcher it, right? And so they're not butchering the English language, but they don't have that,
Sure.
and they don't have the slang, and they don't,
Right.
So people responded to me, and the next thing I know, I'd show up the next morning, and there's like, 10 vans out there waiting for me. I'm like, what's all these vans doing here? They're like, they're here for you. And I'm like, I didn't do anything. So that's how that started. And then when the new guys came in, they wanted to go a little bit of a different direction. They weren't really wild about having me there, and I could feel the tension and so on. And I wanted to get further south into Montalcino, where the famous
Which I'm
Brunello di
happy you did.
Montalcino. Yeah. And so I went to Montalcino, and I ended up living there for 4 years, and developed a couple of wineries. And then Montalcino has a very specific clientele, and I noticed that over the years now, I'm missing out on a broader audience of wines. People come from Montalcino to buy Brunello, and that's it. But I need to offer my clients everything. My friends in California, my friends in Oregon, my friends in Spain, my friend, France. And so sticking to one wine, one place started after a few years, started to get to the point where my client file was like very heavy in Brunello. And then, I needed to branch out. So I started a consulting business, and I branched out, and so that I would have different price points, different styles, different, and that went well for 2.5 years, 3 years. I was actually in Montalcino at a big wine event that we do every year, and Becs is calling me on the phone every 2 seconds, and and I'm like, my phone keeps ringing. So I answer the phone, and I'm like, I'm in a tasting. You know what I'm doing? What's so important? You got to go to the grocery store. And I'm like, what? I'm like 3 hours away from you or 2 hours away from you. And I said, I'm not coming home till tomorrow. Can't we do this later? And she's like, no, you don't understand. We lived closer to Florence at that time. All of the local suburban stores that they were wiped out. I was out in the countryside, and so our stores out in the countryside were still stocked. And I didn't know anything was going on. I said, okay, so what's the big... There's a virus attacking, blah, 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 blah. Like, what are you,
You're like, I don't know.
About?
Yeah.
And so she started sending me pictures from our local grocery stores. And she went to like 3 or 4 of them, and they were just empty. So I was looking at them, going, what? I said, okay. You have to come home right now. Like, okay, take it easy. And so I wrapped up my tasting, got in the car, hit one of our country stores, and loaded up everything I could possibly buy. And even there, they were starting to, the news was starting to filter out there. So I loaded up on everything. I loaded my SUV with everything I possibly could. It was packed solid. And then I made my way home, not knowing that when I got home, I wasn't going to be able to leave for the next 6 months, right? And so my work stopped,
right,
basically overnight, and hence how I arrived here in Puerto Rico. So they were saying, Americans got to come home, but I had my whole life there, my own house, my cars, my dog, my kid, everything. We were just going to school, and it just happened overnight. And so because our family, my wife is from Puerto Rico, so our family's here, and there was some other issues, so we decided that we had to get home because nobody knew how long this was going to last.
Right.
I was afraid because, I smoke cigars, like I chain smoke cigars. And, I was, they were saying, it's a respiratory thing and smokers beware, and I was like, I was like... And then how I got actually back here, right? So after, basically from the end of 2008, I was there for a couple of months, did all my investigative work on vineyards and grapes and what I wanted to do, left, came back probably August of 2009, and I stayed the whole time. So I was there from 2009 to 2019, so there was... 10 years there. I got home in 20, so 11 years. The times before that, if you add it all in, it was about a 12 or 13 year span.
Yeah.
So I accidentally found this great community, Palmas del Mar.
How accidentally?
Well, my daughter at the time, I want to say she was like 7, 6 or 7, and she was born there, she went to school there, and all that. And so, like I said, overnight everything changed, and I literally mean overnight. So now we're locked in our house. Thankfully, we lived out in vineyards and on a mountain and a forest, so we were able to kind of go out and do our thing. But nonetheless, no friends, no visiting. No nothing, right? And when we finally made our way back to Puerto Rico, she got here, and she wasn't so fluent in Spanish, only Italian and English, and had no friends. We were at my mother-in-law's house when we first arrived, and my father-in-law was going through some dementia issues and so on. So... she hasn't seen or had a play date in, almost 8 months or something. No friends, nobody to, on the phone and whatnot. But so that was really hard on her. And then when she got here, she still had no friends here. And any of the kids that she could have met or whatever, they didn't speak Italian and not so much English. So I needed to get her out of that house because my father-in-law was having, there's nurses and doctors in and out and all of that. And Becs went on, what's it called, Expat, Facebook.
Oh, sure, expat.
Expat.
Yeah.
And sent a message out there. Is there anybody here? We live in, Gurab. Is there anybody in the area that has children that, might speak English? And, are comfortable with having kids outside, play date outside type of thing, and blah, 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 blah. And within about, I don't know, it seemed like maybe 4 minutes,
Yeah.
ding, the phone rings. It was Clem Borkowski.
Of course it was.
Of course
That's
it was,
awesome.
right?
Of course it was.
I love that.
And Clem said, I live in Palmas del Mar, and I was familiar with Palmas because, again, we come here every year for the winter months, but I have friends that lived here, and so I would visit with them. But I said every Friday morning we bring all our kids out to the beach, and we have one of our friends or residents here gives the kids surfing lessons every Friday morning.
Francis?
Francis.
Yeah.
And so I said, so bring her out. There's plenty of kids that speak English and not Italian, but so we brought her out that Friday, and that's when I first met Richard, Francis, Clem, and so she got to do some surfing things and started talking with Francis's kids and Marcy and Richard's kids, and immediately, she finally was with kids for the first time in 8 months or something.
Amazing.
And so then we got back to the house, and it was every Friday we would come out. That lasted about 4 weeks in a row there, and my father-in-law was really starting to
Progress.
Yeah, and so I needed to get her out of the house. I said, you know what? Let's go see if there's an apartment for rent in Palmas. And we found a little apartment, and that was it.
She just finished
There's
it.
more wine there. You can.
But it's not the kind that we can open right now.
No.
I think I might have one in the car
Yeah, mine.
or in the house here.
I owe you.
So that's how it happened. And
That's a cool story.
Yeah.
then we just, and then, I found this little apartment. I rented it, and I wanted to get her out of the house. We started staying more and more and more and more and more. Now, instead of just Fridays, we were, and so we pull up to the apartment I rented, and out in the street, which across the street goes down a hill into the golf course.
Mm.
And so it was wide open down there. And if you go down a bit to the left, you go down the hill, go to the left, you're at the tennis courts. It was right there. And so there was a ton of kids.
Oh, yeah, because you were right off of, Monaco and then whatever.
Monte
that-
Cristo or
Yeah.
whatever it's called. Monte Carlo.
Yeah, something like
I don't
that.
know the address. But yeah, so there were all these kids. There must have been 7, 8, 9 kids running up and down the street, man. And I mean, they're screaming and yelling and climbing trees and breaking coconuts on the street. And they're just like the Little Rascals group, and they're like going wild. And so she was afraid to death, when I pulled up. She's like, how am I going to, what should I do? What if they don't, like me?
Yeah.
And I said, well, take it easy. I have a Jack Russell, sweetest little dog, right? And she wants to play more than the kids do and plays harder than the kids do. So I said, tell you what you're going to do. Just open the door and let Mila, the dog, run out. Because I know immediately when she sees kids, she's going to go chase them.
Yeah.
Right? So-
And the kids will love her.
and the minute the dog got lit, all of a sudden there's
Yeah.
10 kids surrounding the dog, and
Yeah.
so Arya comes kind of walking up real shy, kids are like, "Oh my God, this dog!"
It's your
And
dog.
Mila's licking everybody, going in circles, and they're like, "Is this your dog?" And she's like, "Yeah." And like, "What's your name, Aria? What's her name, Mila? Come with us." And off she went.
And there she has friends.
And
Yeah.
you know,
Because
and
this is an amazing community.
it's really an amazing community. And as she ran off with these kids, all of a sudden it hit me the same way.
You're like, oh shit.
Yeah.
I don't have any friends either.
I don't have any friends either. Are the parents going to like me? You know what I mean? And I had my hair was real long, and I was like, you know, I just, so, you know, not the, and yeah, everybody turned out the same way, right? Instead of the dog, I had a bottle of wine. That worked out well, and there you have it. I never left, right? It just got to the point where the apartment, there were some issues with the owners and stuff. There was nothing left, and at this time now, all the prices of the real estate exploded. No one would rent to you. Everybody, wanted to sell, and if they were going to rent to you, it would take 5 months for them to go through all the. So at that time, we had been exploring all around, and school was coming up, and they just announced that they were going to let the kids go back to school. No more homeschooling.
No shit.
And so we immediately went to Palmas, and they were booked. And then there was another school where Francis took his kids to, and there was no spots there. And so there was just nothing around. And everything was just crazy, and had to leave the apartment and so on. So Becs started exploring and found this school out in Aguadilla, bless you, and they had one slot, and there was another school down the street that had one slot. And we loved it out there every time we went out there.
It is beautiful out there.
Yeah, and so I said, listen, we got to do what we got to do, but this kid needs to get back in school.
Right.
And so off we went, and we found a house right on Playhuela, right on the ocean, and Aria had to compete for that seat. So she had to go take a test and compete against all these other kids. And she's still, she's mainly Italian. And she didn't really understand the English alphabet. It's different than the Italian alphabet, the Spanish part. So I was thinking, man, she's never going to get it. It's just going to be. But
she got it.
She got in. It's a faith-based school.
I love that.
So we were just incredibly lucky, and it's a private school, but nonetheless, you had a good mixture of kids and so on. And there we are.
Thank you so much for being here.
It's been my pleasure, and thank you guys for inviting me. And thank you for doing all this. And it's the support is great.
Until next time.
Until next time. You got it.
Thanks, Anthony.
You're very
We love
welcome.
you.
Thank you. Ciao, ciao. I love you guys too.
Ciao.
Ciao, ciao, ciao.